He didn't cry. Not at first. Prince George just folded, quietly, like something inside had snapped the second it touched air. He dropped to his knees in the middle of the palace hall, eyes wide, breath gone, and then he said it. 2 words. He hurt me. Not loud, not angry, just undeniable. And in that moment, before anyone else could speak, before politics, optics, or titles tried to soften the truth, the royal guard moved. So before I show you what happened when the Queen's son found himself face first on the marble, and why the entire palace sealed its exits in under a minute, tap like, hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments, if a child collapsed at your feet, would you have waited? There were mornings in the North Reception Hall that felt like ceremony rehearsing itself. Glass polished to glint, marble floors humming under careful steps, and every sound shaped by the distance between tapestries. It wasn't silence, but something curated to resemble it, a place where history walked beside the living. Prince George was scheduled only for a brief appearance, not a speech, not a photo, just a light presence beside the Duke of Gloucester for a visiting military envoy. The kind of appearance meant to shape a young royal without weighing him down. It was barely 20 minutes past 11. Sergeant Darnley, Royal Guard in full post, had positioned himself near the East Colonnade arch, half visible, intentionally unobtrusive, ceremonial by function but never detached. That was the trick. To watch without watching, to measure without mirroring. From his post, he tracked the room the way good guards did, by noting what didn't move. George's arrival was early, not late. He entered with a palisade and one of the royal equerries. Navy blazer, tie slightly off knot, shoes polished but clearly worn from youth rather than prestige. He looked every inch the boy he was, and half the inch of the prince he was expected to be. His stride was correct, his posture rehearsed, but something beneath it didn't hold. Darnley noticed it first in the rhythm of George's walk. A fraction off, as if one step didn't quite follow the last. Not a limp, just a rhythm misaligned. The boy's right hand brushed near his stomach a few times. No wince, no grasping, just a subconscious motion. Nervous, maybe, or discomfort not meant to be noticed. Across the room, near the gallery's carved fireplace, Thomas Parker Bowles lingered. No title attached, no role. Just the Queen's son, present where others asked permission. He was speaking to someone loosely associated with the reception, a cultural attaché from Spain, perhaps, or maybe an embassy consultant. The details weren't important. What mattered was the look he gave George. It wasn't overt, wasn't even inappropriate, just territorial, as if George was entering a room that had already decided who belonged where. Camilla's son didn't move toward him, but his eyes did, tracking, measuring, not greeting, and George, without glancing, adjusted his route ever so slightly. No child does that unless they've learned to avoid the same place twice. Sergeant Darnley said nothing. His eyes flicked once to the aide beside the prince. The man didn't see it. No one did, because nothing had happened yet, but the room was already choosing its gravity. And George was walking straight into the centre. The ceremony hadn't started, not officially. In these moments before the scheduled steps, time often moved sideways. Conversations were half-formed, eyes tracked uniforms, and only the guards knew exactly when one glance lasted too long. Prince George stood near the edge of the main atrium now, flanked by a junior aide, waiting for his name to be quietly signalled forward. His hands remained loosely clasped in front of him, a picture of control, but Darnley could see it clearly now. The boy wasn't well. It began with his fingers. A subtle tremble, then the way his shoulder rose just a touch too high, with each inhale, trying to draw in breath that didn't seem to land. His face was composed, but the skin around his eyes was pale, lips pressed tighter than they needed to be. Not fear, necessarily. Control, the kind that children only learn when they've been taught to endure in silence. Darnley's gaze moved slowly across the space, cataloguing the scene the way only a trained ceremonial guard could. Camilla's son had shifted position again, closer this time, not toward George, but conveniently into the boy's path. He stood beside a row of exhibit glass along the hall's perimeter. It was meant for portraits of decorated service members, a quiet tribute gallery. But Thomas Parker Bowles didn't care for tributes that didn't include himself. He hadn't touched George, not once. But each repositioning was too perfect. Each glance timed to coincide with a corridor entry or movement by the press pool. And George was adjusting, subtly but consistently, avoiding certain angles, shrinking from camera lines. Once, he reached back to adjust the hem of his blazer and winced. Darnley saw the micro-reaction, the sharp intake, the immediate recovery. The aide next to the boy didn't seem to notice. Or if he did, he dismissed it, perhaps chalked it up to nerves. George's shoulders rolled once, not a stretch, not a reset, a tension flush, the kind of involuntary movement that tries to shake loose something that's clinging inside. Darnley adjusted his grip on the ceremonial rifle. He didn't speak. He wasn't allowed to, not unless protocol was breached. But then something happened that he couldn't unsee. As George moved past one of the marble support columns, he hesitated, not from confusion, not from being lost. He braced, eyes flicked sideways, and though Thomas didn't move, didn't even speak, the boy's entire body language shifted to not occupy the same physical space. And in that frozen breath of a moment, George whispered, not to anyone directly, but just beneath his breath, almost like a reminder to himself. "It's just the one part. That's all." Darnley heard it. He didn't know what it meant, but no 10-year-old should have to rehearse which part is allowed to hurt. The guard stayed still. But inside, everything tilted. There was no warning. One moment, Prince George was standing, shoulders tight, face blank, hands still folded just as he'd been taught. The next, his knees hit the marble. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't clumsy. It was a full-body release, like gravity had finally won. His hands didn't break the fall. His palms never moved. He just folded downward, inward, knees to stone, eyes wide and unfocused. The sound of it, that soft but unmistakable thud, froze every set of eyes in the room. No scream, no cry, just the sound of a child hitting a floor that wasn't supposed to be touched. Aides turned first. One called his name, tentative, confused. The Spanish attaché dropped his briefing cards. The room didn't panic, not yet. These halls were trained for decorum. But then George's mouth moved, slowly, as if air had to be borrowed from somewhere else. He didn't point. He didn't name names. He just forced out the sentence. "He hurt me." The words came like they cost something to say, like they'd been sitting too long inside a throat that had only learned how to stay quiet. And that was it. No explanation, no detail, no story. Just that single clean cut of a sentence, delivered while folded on the floor of a royal hall, in full view of everyone who had just been talking about budgets and security and protocol. It was all anyone needed to hear, and it was the only thing the guard required. The words had barely left George's mouth when Sergeant Darnley moved. It wasn't a decision. It was a reflex, the kind that doesn't require permission or protocol. In a single pivot, he broke the stillness of the guard's posture and covered the 15 feet between himself and Thomas Parker Bowles, with speed no one expected from a ceremonial figure in a red tunic and polished boots. There was no shout, no raised voice, just motion, precise, explosive, unhesitating. Thomas had barely begun to react. His head was still turning toward the collapsed boy, his brows furrowing in feigned confusion, mouth beginning to shape a response. It never formed. Darnley reached him in 2 strides. One arm clamped across Thomas's chest, flat, full, and high. The other shot downward, controlling the wrist, locking it clean against the man's side. Then Darnley turned his body inward, dropped his weight, and drove Camilla's son straight down against the edge of the polished marble bench just behind him. The sound of contact, fabric, breath, bone, was sharp but not violent. It wasn't a slam. It was a maneuver, controlled, compressed. By the time gasps erupted, Thomas was face down, one knee pinned, both arms neutralized. His body jolted, but didn't fight, too stunned to protest. Darnley's voice, when it came, was clear and calm, but final. "Detain him. Two other guards were already in motion, moving like clockwork, not a second behind. One peeled off to cover George's side, placing himself physically between the prince and the scene unfolding. The other moved to support Darnley, securing Thomas's position without drawing attention from the press. Radios crackled. The main doors hissed shut a moment later. Internal locks clicked with mechanical finality. Aides turned, startled. Several phones were lowered. The room began to murmur, but none dared step forward. Thomas blinked hard, still registering what had happened. He tried to twist, but Darnley adjusted the pressure, just enough to remind him that the moment wasn't his to command anymore. "Get off me," Thomas muttered, voice low and tight. No one replied. A footman near the hall's edge dropped a tray. It clattered like thunder. A palace equerry reached for his internal tablet and typed something with trembling fingers. And Prince George, shielded now behind two unmoving red tunics, was lifted carefully by a third guard and escorted silently out of the room. No dramatics, no words, just the clean, coordinated evacuation of a child who had finally said enough. Thomas's voice rose slightly. "This is madness!" Darnley's tone didn't shift. "No, sir, this is restraint." Behind them, the floor of the palace felt like it had just become something else entirely, not a hall of tradition, but a scene of consequence. At first, it didn't register. Camilla's son, flat against the marble, arms held firm, voice straining with half-formed protest, still looked like someone the room was meant to orbit around. For a second, everyone waited for the reset, for someone to laugh, wave it off, resume the order of things, but the reset never came. Instead, silence did. The kind that deepened with every breath unspoken. The guards weren't raising their voices. No weapons were drawn. No orders barked, but every inch of posture had shifted. Thomas wasn't being escorted. He was being contained. Someone tried to approach, a visiting military attaché, with good intentions and bad timing, but one glance from the senior aide at the entryway froze him mid-step. A palm lowered silently, signalling what no one had the authority to say out loud: "Stay out of this!" In the corner, a junior press officer's fingers hovered near his phone camera, then dropped. No one wanted to be the first to capture something they couldn't explain. Darnley hadn't moved. He didn't need to. His hands were steady, his eyes fixed forward, not on Thomas, but on the space beyond him. The same way a soldier watches not the man in front of him, but what that man represents. Thomas, for his part, was beginning to realize the performance wasn't landing. His tone shifted. Less outrage, more confusion. He turned his head just enough to look at the guards flanking him. "What is this? What the hell are you doing? I haven't done anything." One of the guards adjusted his grip. Barely, but it was enough. Thomas stiffened. His words slowed, and across the hall the crowd began to unalign from him. Aides who had once laughed too loudly at his jokes now turned slightly away. The private secretary who'd been taking notes on his comments earlier quietly shut his binder. A diplomat who had been listening to him 5 minutes ago took 2 steps toward a different conversation and never turned back. It wasn't open condemnation. It was worse. It was evaporation. And for the first time, Thomas seemed to feel it. "Where is he?" he asked, voice rising now. "Where's George?" No answer came, because Prince George was already gone, carried out by red tunics that no longer stood behind him. He was not a prince in peril. He was a witness now, and the palace had chosen to believe him. The Queen didn't run. She never did. Her heels clicked in practiced rhythm across the corridor, as if she were entering a scheduled luncheon or taking her seat for a performance where she'd already memorized her applause cues. The moment the guards opened the side panel door for her, the air changed, not because she carried authority, but because she assumed it. Camilla scanned the room, saw the locked doors, the poised guards, the aides who weren't moving, and then her son, pinned, controlled, breathing heavily through his teeth, face flushed with something between rage and humiliation. Her voice was not raised. "What is the meaning of this?" No one answered immediately. The question had the weight of royalty behind it, but none of the room's attention bowed toward her. Not like before, not like always. She moved forward, stopping just short of the guard nearest to Thomas. Her eyes flicked downward. "Let him go. Now." The guard didn't even blink. Instead, the senior officer, Darnley, finally turned toward her, helmet unmoved, voice unshaken. "Ma'am, this is an internal detainment under emergency protocol." "On whose authority?" "The child's." The words landed like a slap. Camilla's composure didn't crack, but something behind her eyes flared. She turned her gaze on her son. "What is this?" Thomas was breathing heavier now. He tried to lift himself, was blocked instantly. "It's absurd," he spat. "I haven't done anything. He's making it up. He fell, and now they're using it to—" "Enough." Her voice snapped like cut thread. She turned to Darnley again, calm, controlled. "There's been a misunderstanding. This is a child under pressure, exhausted, perhaps disoriented. I'm asking you to stand down, return to ceremonial duty." Darnley didn't move. "That's not my role anymore." Camilla's chin lifted slightly. "You realize how this looks?" "Yes, ma'am," he said flatly. "For once." The response drew a ripple, a nearly imperceptible shift in the room. A recognition that something foundational had changed. No shouting, no rebellion, just institutional clarity as spoken aloud. A junior aide approached cautiously, holding a secure tablet. "Ma'am," she whispered, "Prince George has been taken to the East Medical Suite. Private physician called in. Block secured." Camilla blinked once. George wasn't here anymore. She turned back to the guard. "You moved him? Without clearance?" "We didn't wait for clearance," Darnley replied. "We waited for collapse." There was no script for this. Camilla stood frozen in a room where every line she used to command obedience had suddenly expired, and her son, still on the floor, still being held, and for the first time, not protected. The East Medical Suite wasn't built for emergencies. It was meant for discretion. A soft room layered in historical stillness, wood-panelled walls, filtered lighting, pale blue armchairs too old to be modern, but too elegant to be replaced. The windows were frosted, the locks invisible, the silence total. Prince George sat on the edge of the low exam couch, his blazer removed, shirt carefully unbuttoned halfway by a royal physician wearing pale gloves and an expression carved from neutrality. His breathing was calmer now, but shallow, as if each inhale only reached partway down his chest. The doctor didn't speak unless necessary. Neither did William. He stood near the door, arms folded, eyes locked on nothing and everything. Catherine sat beside George, one hand resting gently on his knee, not holding, not gripping, just anchoring. The physician completed the visual inspection, then set the stethoscope aside and nodded once, without emotion. Surface abrasions present, mild contusions, no active swelling, but visible, intercostal muscle tension in the lower thoracic region. Catherine's voice was gentle but clipped. "In English." "There are marks, ma'am. Not bruises yet, but the skin shows signs of pressure. Recently, rib area." "From what?" William asked, his tone flat. The doctor didn't hesitate. "Compression. Possibly hands. Possibly a fall, but the spacing is off. Suggests external grip, not impact." George hadn't said a word since entering the room. Now he spoke, quietly, not dramatic, not even frightened. "It was his elbow first. Then he laughed and said, 'I looked like I was trying to escape, so he dug in.'" He said it like he was recounting a game that went too far. Not a crime. Catherine's hand didn't move, but her knuckles whitened. The physician nodded. "That aligns with tissue response." William didn't speak. "Anything else?" the doctor asked George. The boy looked down, shook his head, but then added softly, "He told me not to fall over, because then I'd make him look bad." The words hung in the air longer than any diagnosis. The doctor turned, picked up a secure case, and placed a single sheet of initial findings into it before sealing it shut. "Medical report will be logged confidentially," she said. "Request for full examination has been filed, but I'll state clearly the boy didn't fall." She paused. He was handled. And with that, the silence in the room turned into something else entirely. Evidence. Camilla stood in the administrative antechamber like she owned the oxygen. 2 aides flanked her, one legal advisor already on a secure call, voice low and fast, fingers flying over a touchscreen. The head of Palace Risk Communications had just arrived, still fastening her ID lanyard, and still no one had told her what she wanted to hear, that it was over. That it had been de-escalated, that someone had pulled the brakes before things slipped into record. Instead, they gave her facts. Plain, linear, inflexible. "He's still in detainment," she asked again, sharp but not shouting. "Yes, ma'am," the aide said, "by Royal Protection Command." "And the boy?" "Secured, under full observation, parental presence confirmed." Camilla's lips parted, but nothing came. The usual phrases weren't landing. "Let's keep this internal. Let's revisit. He meant no harm. We'll speak privately." So she tried another angle. She turned towards Sergeant Darnley, who stood quietly beside the closed briefing door, arms behind his back. "You realize this is a constitutional error," she said coolly. "An overstep." He didn't answer, so she pressed. "You had no standing. You're a ceremonial guard. Still, nothing." It was William who broke the silence. He entered the room like a man who hadn't slept in days and no longer cared about optics. "He acted faster than any of us did," he said. "That's not an overstep. That's correction." Camilla turned toward him, jaw tight. "You're going to let this spiral based on what? A collapse? A bruise?" "Based on a sentence," William said evenly, "and a boy who couldn't breathe." She tried again, softer. "He didn't mean harm. He's family. He's mine." "He's not his," Catherine's voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. She stood with fire in her posture, but not in her volume. "He hurt our son. That doesn't get filed away because of a last name." Camilla's gaze narrowed, but before she could reply, the physician stepped in. "The child is consistent. The injuries match the testimony. No ambiguity." A beat passed. Then Darnley spoke, just once. "We're past the point of discretion." That was it. Not a declaration, not a challenge, just the confirmation that Camilla's influence no longer outranked a child's collapse. The legal advisor whispered something about containment strategy. The comms officer asked if a household clarification should be prepped. Camilla said nothing, because for the first time, no one around her seemed sure whether she still had a line worth defending. It took hours. Not for the systems to activate. Those had worked exactly as designed. Locks engaged, radios rerouted, guards stationed. But for George to exhale without bracing first, that was slower. He sat in a side room just off the medical suite now, not a ward, not a holding area, a sitting room repurposed with quiet on purpose. Fireplace off, windows dimmed, staff dismissed. Catherine sat beside him again, one leg curled under her. William leaned forward in the armchair opposite, elbows on knees, trying not to feel like a prince or a father or a man who had failed by waiting too long. George sipped from a small paper cup. Water, warm, the same kind they give guests who faint from jet lag or exhaustion. He hadn't fainted, and he knew it. When he spoke, his voice wasn't cracked. It was small, flat. "I didn't want it to be a problem." Neither parent interrupted. He said if I ever told, it'd make it worse, that you'd be disappointed, that I'd mess everything up. Catherine's mouth opened slightly, but she held it. Let him finish. He said it didn't matter unless it was blood, and I wasn't bleeding, so it didn't count. William's jaw tightened, his hands clasped together, harder than before. George stared down at the edge of the blanket. He hadn't realized he'd pulled into his lap. His fingers rubbed the hem between thumb and knuckle. "I didn't cry. I was proud of that." That one cracked the air. Not a sob, not a tear, just the sound of a child mistaking pain endured for character earned. Catherine reached out slowly, palm up. George didn't take it right away, then he did. "You're not in trouble," she said. Quiet, certain. "I told, that's what makes it real." William leaned forward further. "No, George, what makes it real is that you said something." George's eyes flicked up, briefly. "What if no one believed me?" William didn't blink. "Then we'd have failed you." There were no long hugs, no swelling music, just stillness. A boy sitting in a room where he'd finally said too much to ever go back. And a family trying to make sure that, for once, he didn't have to survive something alone. The corridor they used wasn't marked on any public map. It ran behind the ceremonial spine of the palace, narrow and softly lit, reserved for contingencies that weren't meant to be seen. Visiting heads of state moved during threats, decoys repositioned during drills, moments that required movement without narrative. 2 guards walked on either side of Thomas Parker Bowles, not gripping him, not pushing, just close enough that he understood the corridor was no longer his to choose. His jacket had been straightened. Someone had handed him a glass of water he hadn't touched. His wrists weren't bound. There were no cameras here, no press, no audience to perform for. That was the first thing that unsettled him. "You're making a mistake," he said again, softer now, not angry. "Testing. This doesn't end well for anyone." Neither guard replied. Their boots struck the carpet in even rhythm, not hurried, not hesitant. Thomas glanced back once, half expecting his mother to appear at the junction, to cut through with an order that would reset the day. She didn't. The door ahead opened without a sound. Inside was a holding suite in name only. A table, 2 chairs, a sealed internal door, and a window frosted just enough to blur the outline of the palace beyond it, designed to contain without spectacle, to delay without announcement. The guard on the right gestured once. "Please step inside," Thomas laughed, short, brittle. "You can't honestly think this holds?" No one answered. The door closed behind him with a soft, magnetic seal. No slam. No lock sound loud enough to mark the moment. Just finality. Outside, the guards didn't linger. One logged the time. The other spoke briefly into his radio. Confirmation, location, status. That was it. No triumph, no relief. Just procedure completing itself. Down the hall, Camilla stood at a distance she hadn't chosen. She didn't approach the suite. She didn't demand entry. She simply watched the corridor where her son had disappeared. Eyes narrowed, jaw set, hands clasped so tight the rings pressed white into her. She understood something there. Not that he was guilty, but that the system she had once bent, quiet, had finally chosen to stop bending it. And for the first time, there was nothing she could say that would make. Sergeant Darnley didn't file a report that night, not because he refused, but because the system was already ahead of him. He was pulled quietly into the oversight room on the administrative floor. No escort, no warning, no clipboard-wielding superior demanding explanation. Just a digital log waiting for his fingerprint and a single statement prompt on a secure screen. Summarize incident from post 7. Include judgment rationale. He typed only what was necessary. He cited visual cues, the collapse, the sentence, the takedown. Nowhere in the report did he name Camilla's son directly. Nowhere did he speculate. He didn't need to. The language of the guard was built for precision, not interpretation. When the oversight commander entered, he didn't sit. Just read the statement in silence, then close the tablet with one motion. "You'll be reassigned. Low visibility." Darnley nodded once. "Understood?" There was no reprimand, no commendation, just that lingering pause before dismissal. The commander exhaled. "You know what this means." Darnley didn't ask for clarification. He had worn the red tunic long enough to know exactly what wasn't being said. There would be no photos with tourists now. No feature spreads in official palace releases. No invitation to guard weddings or honorary balcony posts. The image of the guard had always been one of ceremony, but not Darnley, not anymore. He rose, offered the crisp nod expected of him, and walked out of the room with boots that had not wavered once all day. Not when the child collapsed, not when the Queen protested. Not even now, when the cost of action had begun to tally. He didn't stop for applause, he didn't want it, because some uniforms aren't worn for attention. They're worn for the exact moment someone forgets a child's safety is worth breaking protocol for. If you were the guard in that hall, and you heard a child say, "He hurt me," would you have waited? Do you think Camilla tried to protect the crown today, or just protect her son? And when a child collapses in full view of power, should anyone get the chance to explain it away? Tell me what you believe down in the comments. If this story moved you or made you think, tap like, hit subscribe, and smash that bell icon so you don't miss what's coming next. Share this video with someone who still believes actions should matter more than appearances. There's more waiting for you on the screen now. Watch one and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new story.